Imagine drifting back through time, not just decades, but centuries. Before the noise, before the rush, before Thanksgiving became parades, football games, and crowded dinners. Tonight, we're stepping into the quiet heart of early America, where gratitude wasn't a holiday. It was a way of life. So take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and if you enjoy peaceful journeys into the past, make sure to subscribe. It helps this calming corner of history grow, and it ensures you never miss a moment of these gentle time travel stories. Now let's wander together into the soft glow of an early American Thanksgiving. Gratitude in early America was not a once-a-year celebration, nor was it marked by grand feasts or elaborate traditions. It was something far quieter, far more intimate, and deeply woven into the daily struggle of simply staying alive in a world that was as beautiful as it was unforgiving. For many families living in the 1600s, 1700s, and even deep into the 1800s, every season carried its own trials, and every harvest, whether abundant or barely enough, held the weight of an entire year's hope. Thanksgiving, in those times, was not merely a holiday to look forward to. It was a moment of pause after months of hardship, a breath of relief in a life that offered very few chances to rest. To understand their gratitude, you must imagine the world as they saw it. Untamed forests stretching endless and shadowed, winters that fell early, and with a cold more biting than most had ever known, summers that scorched fields and tested the limits of endurance, and long nights where the only light came from flickering candles or the glow of the hearth. In those evenings, families sat close together, listening to the wind push against the doors of their small wooden homes, acutely aware that everything they owned, everything they relied on, was the result of their own hands. If the crops failed, they had no store down the road to save them. If the hunt was poor, there was no market to depend on. Their survival was a fragile balance, one shaped by weather, soil, strength, and faith. The planting season began long before the warmth truly settled in. As soon as the ground softened enough to be worked, families rose before dawn to prepare the earth. The soil was turned by hand or with the help of simple tools, each stroke of the hoe or plow carving out hope for the months to come. Children carried baskets of seeds, carefully passed from generation to generation, while adults knelt in the cool morning air, pressing kernels and seedlings into the ground with quiet prayers that the earth would be kind. They knew that the coming months would test them. Drought could wither the crops, storms could flatten them, insects could devour what little had grown. And yet they planted anyway. Planting was an act of faith, faith in nature, faith in God, faith in themselves. By midsummer, the work continued under a blazing sun, sweat soaked through linen shirts, and the backs of those tending the fields ached from hours bent over rows of corn, beans, squash, and whatever other vegetables the land allowed. There were no breaks, no holidays, no days where anyone could afford to simply sit and rest. Insects swarmed, storms rolled across the sky with thunder that shook the ground, and every change in the weather threatened to undo months of labor. Yet even in the heat and exhaustion, there was a quiet rhythm to their days. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the sight of green rows stretching out beneath the sky, the knowledge that life itself depended on these plants. These things gave them a sense of purpose, even peace. Harvest season was the most crucial and emotionally the most overwhelming. It was a time when everything came together or everything fell apart. Families rose when the sky was still gray, gathering vegetables, cutting wheat, pulling corn from dry husks and carrying the heavy bounty home. They understood the rhythms of nature not as observers, but as participants. They knew the sound of the earth when it was fertile, and when it was tired. The scent of approaching rain, the warning signs of an early frost, the way the wind changed before winter arrived. Their gratitude came from living in harmony with these rhythms, respecting them, fearing them, and honoring them. To survive in early America was to understand the land deeply, almost spiritually. As night fell on those early Thanksgiving evenings, families gathered around the hearth, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of firelight. The crackling logs created a soft, steady soundtrack, soothing and comforting after long months of constant labor. Children climbed into their parents' laps, wrapped in wool blankets, listening to stories of previous harvests, previous winters, and the lessons learned from each passing year. These stories carried wisdom, reminding them that survival was not guaranteed, but perseverance, faith, and unity made the impossible possible. Even the silence of those evenings held meaning. Outside, the wind moved through bare branches, whispering through the darkness. The world felt vast, yet the home felt safe, a sanctuary carved out of hardship and determination. That sense of safety, however temporary, was something to be grateful for. And so, early Americans ended their day with quiet hearts, knowing they had faced the challenges of the year and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the land that sustained them. Gratitude rooted in survival is a gratitude that runs deep. It does not vanish when times are hard. It grows stronger. It becomes woven into the fabric of daily life, shaping the way people see the world, shaping the way they raise their children, shaping the stories they pass down. And for early Americans, this gratitude became one of their most enduring traditions, one that would eventually transform into the Thanksgiving holiday we know today. But in those early years, long before parades, football, and pumpkin pie, Thanksgiving was a quiet moment, a gentle pause, a time to acknowledge not abundance but resilience. It was not about having everything. It was about having enough. Enough food, enough warmth, enough strength, and hope to face another winter, another year, another unknown season in the vast and unpredictable world of early America. And as families drifted off to sleep on those cold November nights, listening to the wind outside and the soft breathing of their loved ones beside them, they carried with them a gratitude that came not from celebration, but from survival. A gratitude that shaped their lives, their communities, and the very soul of a nation. As the embers of the fire glowed softly and families settled into the calm of an early American night, gratitude lingered in the air, like a gentle warmth. For people who lived so close to the edge of survival, gratitude was an ongoing companion, something felt each time a child recovered from illness, each time a winter storm passed without harming the livestock, each time neighbors arrived with help when it was needed most. It was a gratitude born not only from the success of a harvest, but from the constant awareness that everything they had could be taken by the next season, the next storm, the next twist of fate. In many homes, gratitude was expressed in small, almost invisible actions. A mother might save the softest part of a loaf for her youngest child. A father might stop to repair a worn door hinge so that cold wind wouldn't creep into the house at night. Children might gather wood not because they were asked, but because they could see how much their parents carried on their shoulders. These gestures were quiet languages of care, all shaped by the understanding that life was fragile, and kindness made survival easier. In the stillness of the dark autumn night, these tiny acts of love held more meaning than the largest feast. Outside, the world continued its patient transition toward winter. The last of the leaves fell from the trees and drifted slowly to the ground, creating a soft blanket over the earth. The colors of the landscape shifted from gold and red to muted browns and grays. Streams thinned as temperatures dropped, and animals prepared for the months ahead, their movements serving as silent reminders of the natural cycles people depended on. Early Americans observed these changes closely. Their gratitude was intertwined with their understanding of nature's patterns, the quiet wisdom of the land teaching them when to rest, when to work, when to gather, and when to be still. As December approached, gratitude became almost a form of courage. The worst of winter was still ahead. Snow would come, layering roofs and pathways, closing families inside their homes for days at a time. Ice would cling to windows, and storms would shake the walls with their fierce howling. In those moments, gratitude took on new shapes. Families were grateful for the stacks of firewood they had gathered during warmer months. They were grateful for the jars and barrels of food neatly lined against the walls. They were grateful for the warm blankets stitched slowly by hand during long evenings. They were grateful simply for the company of one another, for the reassurance of familiar voices in the cold. When storms came, they often arrived with little warning. Thick clouds rolling in from distant horizons, swallowing the sky in heavy gray. The temperature would drop quickly, and winds would whip through the trees, rattling shutters and doors. Inside, families gathered near the hearth, listening to the storm rage outside, while the flames danced and crackled, casting moving shadows around the room. In those hours, gratitude meant safety. The fire was a lifeline, the steady warmth keeping away the biting cold that waited just beyond the wooden walls. Children would huddle close to their parents, wrapped tightly in blankets, their sleepy eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. Parents stayed awake longer, listening carefully, always protective, always aware of how fragile their shelter could be. Yet even during the harshest storms, there were moments of beauty, moments early Americans never failed to notice. The way snowflakes shimmered in the lantern light. The soft hush that fell over the land after a snowfall, muffling every sound until the whole world felt peaceful. The way the landscape glowed beneath the full moon as though blanketed in silver. These small wonders brought a different kind of gratitude, quiet and contemplative. They reminded families that even in difficulty, there was still beauty to be found, still reasons to pause, breathe, and appreciate the world around them. The winter nights were long, stretching out slowly, offering both rest and reflection. After the evening chores were done and the fire built high, families often retreated into stories. Storytelling was more than an entertainment. It was a way of preserving memory, passing down knowledge, and reminding one another of the strength their ancestors had shown in their own struggles. Stories about the first settlers who faced winters with even fewer resources than those who came after. Stories about near-failed crops that had miraculously revived. Stories about hunts where a single successful catch meant the difference between hunger and survival. These tales were shared softly, often in the dim glow of firelight, and they reminded everyone listening that endurance was a legacy they carried forward. The long, slow pace of winter allowed families to reflect on the previous year with gratitude that grew deeper over time. The struggles felt less frightening when remembered from a safe place, and the successes felt more meaningful. Parents would talk quietly about the moments that had tested them, times when they feared the crops would fail, moments when illness threatened their home, times when storms damaged their fields or livestock. They would also remember the kindness of neighbors who helped repair a roof or bring extra food when supplies ran low. These memories reinforced the idea that gratitude was not just personal, it was communal. Survival depended on unity, and unity depended on compassion. As the winter deepened, gratitude found new forms in the work of daily life. When families cooked meals from preserved food, they appreciated the effort that had been spent months earlier to store it. When they repaired tools or mended clothes, they understood that each task was an investment in their future. Even simple pleasures, warm bread, a cup of fresh broth, a quilt stitched from scraps, were reminders of how much could be created from so little. Gratitude became a lens through which they viewed everything, transforming even mundane tasks into quiet celebrations of resilience. In moments when sickness entered the home, a common occurrence during winter, gratitude became even more intense. Families cared for one another with a tenderness born of necessity and love. Warm cloths were laid across foreheads, stews were prepared with nourishing herbs, and prayers were whispered throughout the night. When a sick family member recovered, the relief was profound. Gratitude flowed through the home like a gentle breeze, softening every heart. Recoveries felt like blessings directly from the heavens, reminders that even in their most vulnerable moments, hope had not abandoned them. When spring finally arrived, slowly and almost shyly, gratitude rose in the hearts of early Americans with renewed strength. They watched the snow melt into the soil, listened to the rivers swell with fresh water, and breathed in the earthy scent of thawing ground. The first green shoots that broke through the soil were like promises, quiet assurances that life continued, that the land still had more to give. Families stepped out of their homes after months of cold confinement, blinking into the sunlight, feeling warmth return to their skin. The relief they felt in these moments was immeasurable, and their gratitude was almost overwhelming. As fields were prepared once more for planting, gratitude guided each step. Seeds were placed into the ground with reverence, as if each one held the possibility of a miracle. Children helped with new enthusiasm, their small hands scattering kernels into neat rows, their voices bright after a long winter. Parents watched them with quiet smiles, grateful for the opportunity to begin again. Every season offered a chance to reset, to hope once more, and gratitude was the thread that connected each cycle to the next. Neighbors came together more often as the weather warmed, helping one another with tasks too large for a single family. Together they repaired fences, rebuilt barns damaged during winter storms, and shared tools and knowledge. These gatherings were infused with gratitude too, gratitude for shared labor, shared laughter, shared burdens. And when, after months of intense work, the crops began to grow tall once again, gratitude filled every corner of their lives. They watched the fields carefully, not with anxiety, but with respect and appreciation. Each stalk of corn, each sprouting bean, each blooming flower was a reminder that life renewed itself, again and again. By the time the next autumn approached, gratitude had traveled full circle. It had carried families through summer storms, through winter hardships, through spring renewal, and through the hope of a growing season. And so, when the time came once more to gather the harvest, early Americans did so with hearts full of deep, enduring thankfulness. Gratitude was not postponed until the crops were stored or the meals prepared. It lived in every moment, every sunrise, every shared meal, every quiet evening by the fire. When they sat together at the next Thanksgiving, it was not just a celebration of food or tradition. It was an acknowledgement of everything they had survived, everything they had learned, everything they had built with their own hands. Their gratitude was steady, humble, and sincere, shaped by a life so connected to nature that every joy and every hardship felt personal. And as darkness fell on that new Thanksgiving evening, just as it had in every year before, families once again found themselves gathered around their hearths, wrapped in warmth, listening to the gentle sounds of the world outside. Their gratitude, rooted in survival and shaped by the land, became a quiet heartbeat in the story of America, a legacy carried forward through generations, always reminding them that even in the harshest seasons, there was beauty, resilience, and hope waiting to be discovered. Simple Hearthside gatherings in early America were some of the most cherished moments of the entire year, not because they were extravagant or abundant, but because they offered a sense of warmth and closeness that daily life rarely allowed. In a world where work lasted from dawn until well after sunset, where winters were unforgiving and summers were a test of endurance, these quiet moments around the hearth became a refuge, an emotional shelter from the uncertainty that surrounded early American families. And though Thanksgiving was not always celebrated with the scale or festivity we might recognize today, its essence lived in these intimate gatherings, shaped by the glow of the hearth and the presence of loved ones. Imagine stepping into a small wooden home in the late 1700s or early 1800s. The door creaks slightly as it opens, letting in a crisp breath of early winter air. Inside, the world feels different, softer, warmer, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread cooling on a rough-hewn wooden table. The hearth sits at the center of the home, not just as a source of heat, but as a place for cooking, storytelling, and connection. Flames dance lazily behind iron grates, casting flickering shadows on the walls and filling the room with a steady, comforting crackle. For families of that time, the hearth was the beating heart of the household, and Thanksgiving, whether formally named or simply understood, was often celebrated right there beside it. These gatherings did not resemble the grand feasts that modern celebrations often emphasize. In most homes, the table was small and simple, crafted from whatever wood the family had access to: oak, pine, hickory. It bore the marks of years of use, scratches from knives, stains from spilled broth, and dents where children had leaned too heavily. Around it sat sturdy chairs or benches, sometimes mismatched, sometimes repaired countless times, but always filled with the warmth of the people who gathered there. The meal itself was modest, shaped by the land, the season, and the family's own labor. Bread, freshly pulled from the hearth oven or baked in a cast-iron pot suspended over the fire, was often the star of the table. Its aroma filled the entire house. Yeasty, warm, comforting. It was a smell that carried memories of patience. Kneading dough in the early morning cold, watching it rise slowly near the fire, waiting for the crust to brown just right. Alongside the bread might sit a pot of stew simmering gently atop the hearthstone. It was the kind of stew that gathered the essence of the season into one humble dish. Root vegetables softened to perfection. Herbs gathered months earlier and dried above the chimney. And perhaps a bit of meat if the hunting had been good or the livestock plentiful. Families made the most of what they had, stretching ingredients carefully, making sure nothing went to waste. Even the smallest scraps could find their way into a broth or be saved for the next day's meal. The warmth of the hearth reached not only the food but also the people. After hours or days of preparation, family members finally took their seats around the table. Instead, they settled into the moment, appreciating the rare peace that came when the tools were set aside, the chores paused, and the only task left was to be together. Many families bowed their heads, offering quiet thanks not just for the meal, but for surviving another year, another harvest, another season. another set of challenges that tested their strength and their faith. The air during these gatherings was thick with gratitude, but also with something else. Connection. Tune. In a world without endless entertainment or constant distraction, people learn to appreciate conversation, silence, and presence. The flicker of the fire provided a natural rhythm for the evening, its steady glow offering comfort even when the wind howled outside or snow piled up against the windows. Children, who spent much of their time working alongside their parents in fields, barns, or kitchens, cherished these moments. They listened to the soft conversations of their elders, absorbing stories of the past, stories of how their grandparents survived harsh winters, how their parents built the very home they sat in, how neighbors supported one another through droughts or illness. These stories were not just entertainment. They were lessons, reminders that life was fragile, but that community and perseverance made it bearable. Sometimes, after the meal, the family would linger at the table long after the plates had been cleared. The fire would continue crackling while parents sipped warm drinks, perhaps cider or spiced broth, while children dozed against their parents' shoulders. Outside, the darkness of early evening wrapped the house in stillness, making the glow inside feel even more precious. Without lamps, electricity, or the constant hum of modern life, the quiet was profound, then almost sacred silence that made every whisper, every sigh, every crack of the fire feel significant. Music occasionally found its way into these gatherings, though. Someone might hum an old tune, or a father might pull out a simple instrument, a fiddle, a flute, or even a homemade drum, and play softly while the rest of the family listened. The music drifted through the home like a warm blanket, smoothing the edges of a long year and reminding everyone that joy could be found in even the simplest moments. For many families, the Hearthside gathering was the highlight of the entire season, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because everything extraordinary happened quietly. Food shared, stories told, warmth held, loved ones near. The sense of togetherness that filled the home was something they carried with them throughout the winter, long after the flames had died down and the last crumbs had been eaten. As the night deepened, the hearth became a source of reflection. Parents would look at their children sleeping near the fire and feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility, but also gratitude. They were thankful for the roof over their heads, for the harvest stored away for the winter, for the health of their loved ones, and for the simple blessing of another day lived together. In early America, life was unpredictable. Illness could spread quickly. Storms could destroy crops. A single accident could change everything. These risks made moments of peace feel even more precious. The hearth also symbolized endurance. Families spent many winter nights gathered closely around it, relying on its heat for survival. During storms that rattled the walls, during nights when the temperature dropped far below freezing, the hearth offered not just warmth but hope. Its steady glow reminded them that even in the coldest, darkest moments, there was a place of safety. Sometimes, as the flames softened, parents would share memories of their own childhood gatherings, sitting beside their parents at the hearth, listening to the same stories, eating the same humble meals, feeling the same warmth. These memories created a sense of continuity that stretched across generations. The hearth connected them not only to the present moment, but to their ancestors, their traditions, and the values they wished to pass on. Thanksgiving during this era wasn't always marked by a date or a proclamation. It wasn't commercialized and it wasn't filled with expectations. It was simply a moment, an evening when the family paused, breathed, and acknowledged the gift of being together. Even if food was scarce, even if the year had been hard, the hearth offered a space where gratitude could flourish in quiet ways. The crackling fire had a way of softening hearts. Families who had argued, stressed, or worried throughout the year often found common ground during these gatherings. The warmth eased the tension out of tired shoulders. The glow illuminated faces in a gentle way, reminding each person of the humanity of those around them. In many homes, forgiveness was offered, promises were made, and bonds were strengthened, not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of sitting together in the light of the fire. As the evening drew to a close, parents would gently carry their children to bed, tucking them beneath heavy quilts stitched from scraps of old clothing, each patch holding a fragment of family history. The embers in the hearth would be carefully tended, banked to last through the night. The room would darken, the last wisps of smoke curling into the chimney, and the family would drift into sleep with full stomachs, warm hands, and peaceful hearts. Outside, the world remained quiet. Stars shimmered above snow-covered fields. The wind slowed, brushing softly against the house. The land, too, seemed to rest, as if participating in the quiet reflection of the families it sheltered. And in that stillness, the essence of early American Thanksgiving lived, not in abundance, not in spectacle, but in the fragile, beautiful simplicity of Hearthside gatherings. In the glow of the fire, families rediscovered their strength. In the warmth of shared meals, they rediscovered their unity. In the silence of winter nights, they rediscovered themselves. Year after year, these moments accumulated like layers of ash beneath the hearth, soft, subtle reminders of countless evenings spent together. Countless stories shared, countless expressions of love unspoken yet deeply felt. Generations carried these memories forward, shaping the traditions that would one day become the Thanksgiving celebrations known today. But even now, even centuries later, the true heart of Thanksgiving remains the same. It is not found in the size of the feast, the number of guests, or the elaborate preparations. It is found in the quiet moments, the shared warmth, the gentle presence of loved ones gathered together. It is found in the glow of a hearth, real or symbolic, that reminds us of what truly matters: connection, gratitude, and the simple joy of being together. And so in those small wooden homes scattered across early America, families discovered something profoundly beautiful, that even with little, they had enough warmth, enough food, enough hope, enough love. The hearth gave them more than heat, gave them a place to belong. As the fire burned low and sleep settled over the quiet household, the gratitude they felt lingered, soft and steady, much like the fading glow of the embers, warm, peaceful, and enduring. Even after the meal had been eaten and the plates cleared, the hearth continued to draw the family together. There was something magical about the fire, a kind of quiet gravity that encouraged conversation, storytelling, and reflection. Fathers would often rock gently in a chair beside the flames, gazing into the dancing light while their thoughts wandered over the year's events. Mothers might sit nearby, mending clothes by the firelight, their hands moving slowly but with careful precision, each stitch a silent testament to their care and endurance. The sound of needle against fabric, the soft shuffle of feet across wooden floors, and the steady crackle of logs combined to create an atmosphere that was both peaceful and grounding, a cocoon against the chill and uncertainty outside. Children, their small faces still flushed from running about or helping in the kitchen, often sat cross-legged near the hearth, listening intently. Sometimes they held a simple toy, carved from scraps of wood, or a small animal figure fashioned from bits of cloth. Other times they simply watched the flames, fascinated by the way light shifted and shadows moved across the walls. For them, the hearth was not just warmth. It was a source of wonder, a place where imagination could flourish. They learned early on that the fire was a companion as much as a tool, offering light, heat, and a stage for the stories of their family's past and hopes for the future. Stories told around the hearth varied, but they always shared a common thread: survival, perseverance, and gratitude. Elders recounted memories of winters harsher than the present one, of crops that failed yet somehow sustained life, of neighbors who extended their hands when the family struggled. They spoke softly, with voices that rose and fell like the crackle of the fire, pulling everyone into the rhythm of memory. The children listened not only for entertainment, but for lessons on courage, patience, and humility. Every tale carried wisdom, small practical details about gardening, hunting, cooking, and maintaining the home, but also deeper truths about resilience, cooperation, and the meaning of family. At times, the conversation would shift to reflections on the changing seasons, on the way the world outside seemed alive with cycles beyond human control. Fathers might describe the approach of winter storms, reading the clouds and winds with the knowledge of years spent observing nature. Mothers would comment on the earliest signs of frost or the way certain herbs needed to be harvested before the first freeze. Every word carried weight because survival depended on awareness, on understanding the land, on acting wisely in response to its cues. These quiet lessons, imparted without urgency, were as important as the food on the table or the warmth of the fire. They were the tools that prepared the next generation to live in harmony with the world around them. Sometimes, when the house was particularly still, the family would engage in quiet games or small entertainments. A simple riddle passed from parent to child, or a counting game using pebbles or beans, could occupy a half hour while keeping spirits light. The flicker of the fire made the simplest gestures feel intimate. A child's laugh echoed softly in the small room, blending with the crackle of the logs, and the sound seemed to linger, filling the space with warmth as effectively as the fire itself. In these moments, the house felt less like a shelter from hardship and more like a sanctuary, where the pressures of the outside world could be set aside, and everyone could exist simply as themselves. Meals themselves were often extended experiences rather than hurried affairs. Bread was broken slowly with care, and the stews and roasted vegetables were passed carefully from hand to hand. Every bite was savored, not only for its flavor but for the labor and the season it represented. Families recognized the effort that went into producing even the smallest portion of food, the planting, the tending, the harvesting, the cooking, and so eating became an act of gratitude, an acknowledgement of the life-sustaining work that preceded the meal. Silence was respected as much as conversation, allowing everyone to reflect inwardly on their own experiences and blessings. There was a meditative quality to these gatherings, a rhythm established by shared effort, shared food, and shared presence. Beyond nourishment, the hearth provided lessons in patience and timing. Firewood had to be tended carefully, coals needed to be moved, and the flames coaxed just the right height for cooking or warmth. Children learned by watching how adults moved about the room, adjusting logs, stoking flames, and shifting pots with precision. These movements became a form of choreography, almost ritualistic in their care, and contributed to a quiet order within the home. By observing, children absorbed a sense of responsibility, understanding that even the smallest actions had consequences, that the comfort of the household depended on attention, care, and respect for both the fire and those around it. During particularly long winters, when storms raged outside for days or weeks at a time, the hearth became even more central to daily life. Families could not venture far into the snow or ice, and isolation could feel overwhelming. In these times, the fire offered continuity and security. It was a reliable center, a place where work, play, and rest converged. Children learned to entertain themselves near it. Adults conducted their daily chores beside it. Everyone relied on its light and warmth to structure their days. The fire, in a sense, became a teacher, demonstrating how patience, careful attention, and respect for resources could sustain life through long stretches of difficulty. Gratitude during these gatherings extended not just to family and food, but to the fire itself. Many early Americans treated their hearths with reverence. It was maintained meticulously, kept free of ash that could smother flames, fed steadily to maintain warmth, and cleaned regularly to ensure safety. A hearth that failed could leave a family exposed to freezing temperatures, making its care a matter of survival. As a result, tending the fire was often a shared task, and participation by all family members reinforced the value of cooperation and attentiveness. Everyone understood that the hearth's glow was inseparable from the well-being of the household. Religious and spiritual reflection often intertwined with these gatherings as well. Families might offer prayers before meals, thanking God or nature for sustenance, shelter, and the safety of the household. These prayers were simple and heartfelt, sometimes whispered softly around the table, sometimes shared aloud in unison. They were less about ceremony and more about acknowledgement, an honest recognition of the interconnectedness of life, of the labors of the season, and the blessings of survival. The act of giving thanks became as important as the meal itself, an enduring expression of humility and appreciation. Music and song, though simple, played a subtle role in hearthside gatherings. A mother might hum a lullaby while tending to a task. A father might strum a basic tune on a handmade instrument. Children might clap lightly to maintain a rhythm. Music added layers of warmth to the already comforting environment, and the shared enjoyment of it strengthened familial bonds. The soft, repetitive melodies were often remembered long after the fire had died down, lingering in memory like the last flickers of flame. Music, like stories and meals, became a thread connecting generations, teaching values of cooperation, joy, and emotional expression. Even the arrangement of the home reflected an understanding of intimacy and togetherness. The table was positioned close to the fire so that warmth radiated evenly. Chairs and benches were placed so family members could easily converse or pass dishes to one another. Blankets or furs might be laid across the backs of chairs for comfort, or a small rug might soften the wooden floor, adding to the room's cozy ambience. Every choice, from furniture placement to lighting, contributed to a sense of security and peace, making the Hearthside gathering more than just a meal. It was a fully immersive experience in connection and comfort. As night deepened and the final tasks of the day were complete, families would often linger a little longer, simply enjoying the presence of one another. Children's eyelids grew heavy, and adults' conversations softened into murmurs. The fire burned lower, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the walls, and the house seemed to exhale with a collective sigh. The simplicity of the gathering, food, warmth, family stories, was enough. Nothing grand was required. The essence of Thanksgiving, of home, of gratitude, was captured in these moments, subtle yet profound. Long after the family had gone to bed, the hearth continued its quiet work. The coals glowed faintly, a reminder of the life and warmth that had permeated the room. It absorbed the echoes of laughter, the lingering scent of bread and stew, the whispered prayers, and the soft hum of a lullaby. In this way, the hearth itself seemed to participate in the life of the home, holding memory and emotion in its steady, enduring warmth. Even centuries later, when people reflect on the origins of Thanksgiving and the essence of early American gatherings, the hearth remains central. It symbolizes more than heat or cooking. It represents connection, reflection, patience, and gratitude. The simplest wooden table, the crackle of the fire, and the shared presence of family carried lessons about resilience, humility, and the true meaning of togetherness. In the quiet of those evenings, as snow drifted silently against the windows, the families around the hearth experienced a richness that modern abundance cannot replicate. They learned that joy could be found in simplicity, that gratitude was more powerful than wealth, and that survival, nourished by love, care, and cooperation, was an achievement to be quietly celebrated. These lessons, whispered softly around the glow of firelight, shaped not only the individuals in the room, but the generations that would follow. Through the centuries, the image of these simple hearthside gatherings has become an enduring emblem of what Thanksgiving once meant. Not spectacle, not extravagance, not even formal tradition, but warmth, connection, and heartfelt gratitude. The fire's glow, the smell of baked bread, the quiet sharing of stories, all of these small elements together create a vision of peace and belonging, a model for what human communities can achieve when they prioritize care, reflection, and love. Even today, one can imagine sitting by such a hearth in the flickering light, enveloped in the gentle warmth, listening to the soft crackle of wood, breathing in the comforting aromas, and feeling that same sense of belonging that early Americans did. It is a timeless experience, one that transcends centuries and speaks directly to the human heart. It reminds us that the simplest gatherings, when imbued with care and attention, can create memories that last a lifetime and instill lessons of gratitude that endure far beyond a single season. In early America, meals were never taken lightly, for every ingredient was the product of labor, patience, and the careful rhythms of the seasons. There were no grocery stores to wander down with a basket, no packaged foods to reach for in an instant. Instead, families relied entirely on what they could grow, hunt, or preserve with their own hands. Each dish on the table carried the story of months of effort, of hope sown into the soil, of evenings spent tending crops and preparing what the land had given. The taste of these meals, while simple, was deeply satisfying because it was honest. It was the taste of survival, of connection, of life lived in harmony with nature. The process began long before the table was set. Seeds were carefully selected from the best fruits, grains, and vegetables of previous seasons. Families often saved portions of the harvest specifically for planting the next year, knowing that a single failed crop could mean hardship in the months to come. Children learned early to distinguish healthy seeds from weak ones, to sort through kernels of corn, to recognize the shape and color of beans that would produce strong plants. Adults labored in fields and gardens from dawn until dusk, tending the soil, weeding the rows, watering when rain failed to come, and praying for favorable conditions. In these efforts, meals began to take shape long before the cooking fire was lit, and gratitude for the eventual feast was embedded in the sweat, toil, and care invested in the land. Root vegetables formed the backbone of most meals. Potatoes, turnips, carrots, parsnips, and beets were harvested in their season, Often dug from frozen or hardened soil, their earthy flavor reminding the family of the land's endurance. These vegetables could be roasted, boiled, or incorporated into hearty stews. Each preparation required careful attention. Overcooking would sap their natural sweetness. Undercooking would leave them hard and unappetizing. Families learned to read the subtle cues of texture, aroma, and color, skills passed down from generation to generation, so that every root could be enjoyed at its peak. The effort invested in these humble ingredients made every bite more meaningful. It was a taste of the very earth that had sustained them, a reminder that life and nourishment were inseparable from the land they worked so diligently. Corn was another cornerstone of the early American diet, often appearing in multiple forms at a single meal. Fresh ears could be roasted over the fire, while dried corn was ground into meal for cornbread or porridge. Cornbread itself was a staple of the hearth, simple yet satisfying, a warm golden loaf that carried the flavor of the season and the labor of countless hands. Making cornbread required skill and attention. Cornmeal had to be sifted carefully, water or milk added in precise amounts, and the batter cooked evenly over a hot hearth. The aroma alone filled the home with comfort, a gentle warmth that seemed to echo the care with which the meal had been prepared. When families gathered around the table, breaking cornbread by hand and sharing it with one another, they tasted not only sustenance but the embodiment of patience, skill, and shared effort. Stews, rich with root vegetables, grains, and occasionally meat, were central to the early American table. A single pot could feed the entire family, simmering gently over the fire for hours as flavors blended together. Sometimes wild herbs, carefully preserved from the garden, added fragrance and nuance, while salt, often stored with careful rationing, brought out the full taste of each ingredient. When meat was available, it was often wild game such as rabbit, venison, or turkey, hunted or trapped with precision and care. These meats, lean and full of flavor, were treated with respect. Nothing went to waste. Every bone might be used to make broth, every scrap incorporated into the next meal. The act of preparing stew was meditative, a slow, rhythmic dance. Arranging these elements on the table was itself an act of mindfulness, a ritual that prepared the family to engage fully with the meal, to appreciate not just its taste but its history. Seasonal rhythms guided every choice. In autumn, meals reflected the abundance of the harvest: squash, pumpkin, corn, apples, and preserved berries. In winter, preserved root vegetables, dried fruits, and stored grains became central, supplemented by whatever meat had been hunted and stored. Spring brought the first greens, tender shoots, and the promise of new life, while summer offered fresh vegetables, fruits, and herbs bursting with flavor. Each meal tasted like the season it represented, connecting families intimately with the cycles of the earth and reminding them that their survival depended on respect and attentiveness to the natural world. Eating together also reinforced lessons of sharing and equity. Every family member received a portion, no matter how small, and food was never taken for granted. If one dish was especially good, it might be divided so that everyone tasted it. If there was scarcity, the family collectively accepted less rather than allowing one person to go hungry while another had plenty. These practices fostered cooperation, empathy, and an understanding that meals were more than sustenance. They were a reflection of family unity, mutual care, and shared responsibility. As meals concluded, the remnants were carefully handled. Nothing was wasted. Leftovers were stored, bones were saved for broth, vegetable scraps were used for compost or small animal feed. Even the smallest action reflected the careful stewardship that characterized early American households. Gratitude extended beyond the eating itself to the preservation, the reuse, and the ongoing cycle of sustenance that ensured survival through the harsh months to come. As the hearth's fire dimmed, the family often lingered, enjoying warmth and the subtle aftertaste of the meal. Conversations drifted to stories of previous harvests, of successes and failures, of the wisdom learned from each season. The meal, prepared entirely from what they grew, was both a comfort and a teacher, reminding them of the rhythm of life, the rewards of patience, and the importance of family, labor, and gratitude. Each bite, each sip, each shared glance carried lessons beyond nutrition, lessons of endurance, care, and the sacredness of simple, honest labor. Even in the coldest, darkest months, when food might be scarce and survival precarious, families found satisfaction in what they had produced. Each preserved berry, each roasted root, each loaf of cornbread was a triumph, a tangible result of their patience, knowledge, and skill. Meals made only from what they grew were not just nourishment. They were celebrations of resilience, of harmony with the land, and of the enduring human spirit. And so, in early American homes across the countryside, the rhythm of the seasons dictated every meal, every preparation, and every act of gratitude. Meals made entirely from what they could grow, gather, or hunt formed a quiet, intimate tradition that connected families to one another and to the land itself. The simple act of eating in this context became profound, a meditation on life, survival, and the beauty inherent in honest labor. Every dish carried history, every flavor told a story, and every meal nurtured not only the body but the spirit, reminding families that the land they tended, the labor they endured, and the care they extended to one another were all part of a larger, sacred rhythm that sustained them through the years. In the vast expanse of early America, where homesteads were separated by fields, forests, and rivers, survival often depended as much on community as it did on individual effort. Neighbors were not just acquaintances, they were lifelines. Families relied on one another in countless ways, sharing knowledge of the land, lending tools and labor, helping in times of sickness or hardship, and providing support during seasons when crops failed or weather turned against them. Thanksgiving, though it may not have been formalized as a holiday in every household, became a natural occasion for reflecting on these bonds and celebrating the quiet generosity that sustained life in the wilderness. It acted as a thread weaving communities together, connecting isolated homesteads into networks of care and mutual respect. The practice of sharing food was central to this communal support. Families who had managed a successful harvest often extended what they could spare to neighbors who had struggled. A basket of freshly baked bread, a pot of hearty stew, a jar of preserved berries. These humble offerings were more than nourishment. They were expressions of empathy, solidarity, and shared humanity. Giving and receiving food created trust, reinforced relationships, and ensured that no one was left to face the harshness of winter alone. In a time when a failed crop could mean weeks of hunger, the act of sharing food was as critical to survival as planting, hunting, or storing provisions. It was a tangible demonstration of the principle that communities, not individuals, endured. Children observed and participated in these acts of generosity from an early age. They watched their parents carefully measure portions for neighbors, wrap foods in cloth or baskets, and walk to neighboring homes through snow, mud, or rain. They learned the rhythms of reciprocity, the importance of thoughtfulness, and the dignity inherent in giving. At the same time, they experienced the humility of receiving help when needed, understanding that support was not charity, but a mutual acknowledgement that life's challenges affected everyone. These early lessons in empathy and cooperation became foundational, teaching values that would echo through generations. Neighbors reciprocated in similar ways. When one family struggled to preserve vegetables for the winter, another might offer jars of pickles or dried herbs. When a storm destroyed part of a roof or barn, neighbors would gather, offering labor and tools to rebuild what had been lost. These acts were not transactional. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. Thanksgiving, therefore, became more than a meal. It was a reminder of these connections, a time when gratitude for one's own household could extend outward to encompass the wider community. In many rural areas, Thanksgiving gatherings would involve multiple households. Neighbors might be invited to share a simple feast of what each family had contributed. One household brought bread and butter, another offered a stew of root vegetables, another brought preserved fruit, or a hunted bird. Around the shared table, distinctions of wealth, social status, or personal hardship faded. Everyone sat together as equals, united by the shared work of survival and the collective celebration of life's small victories. These gatherings reinforced bonds, strengthened trust, and created a sense of unity that was essential in the face of the uncertainties posed by the wilderness. The journey to share or receive food was often as meaningful as the meal itself. Families traveled on foot across fields and through forests, carrying baskets or containers carefully balanced to prevent spills. Children helped carry smaller loads, learning the value of responsibility and teamwork. The physical effort of these visits reinforced the emotional weight of generosity. The understanding that giving required not only intention but action, endurance, and sometimes sacrifice. Similarly, receiving help required humility, gratitude, and awareness of the labor that went into the offering. In these journeys and exchanges, the community became a living network, each connection a lifeline, each shared meal a tangible reinforcement of trust and interdependence. The shared work of preparing for these communal gatherings also strengthened relationships. When neighbors knew a feast was approaching, it was common for families to assist one another in preparation. Pots were scrubbed and preheated, vegetables were peeled and chopped, bread was kneaded and baked, and birds were cleaned and roasted. This cooperation was both practical and symbolic. It ensured that the meal could be completed efficiently and provided opportunities for social interaction, the exchange of news, and the building of social cohesion. Tasks that might have felt tedious alone became moments of shared effort and quiet companionship, reinforcing the bonds that allowed communities to flourish even in remote or challenging environments. Early Americans also relied on neighbors for knowledge and guidance. Experienced farmers shared tips on planting, harvesting, and preserving crops. Hunters exchanged information about the behavior of wildlife and the best places to trap or hunt game. Midwives and healers often provided assistance across households, guiding families through illness and childbirth. Thanksgiving, in this context, acted as a moment to honor and acknowledge these shared resources, reminding each family that their survival was not a solitary endeavor, but a collective enterprise. Gratitude extended not only to the products of one's own labor, but also to the wisdom, guidance, and support of the broader community. Hospitality was another expression of neighborly support. When a family experienced misfortune, a failed crop, illness, or the loss of livestock, neighbors often opened their homes for meals or shelter. These acts of kindness were rarely announced with fanfare. They were quiet, steady, and consistent, reflecting an understanding that hardship was part of life and that resilience required interdependence. Thanksgiving offered a natural occasion to formalize these practices, to invite neighbors in, share a warm meal, and acknowledge the collective strength that arose from caring for one another. Through these shared experiences, communities developed a culture of empathy and generosity that transcended individual households. Children absorbed lessons about social responsibility during these interactions. They learned that generosity was not merely a moral ideal but a practical necessity, that helping others reinforced mutual survival, and that the community could be relied upon in moments of need. They observed their parents offering care without expectation of return, understanding that kindness itself was a currency more valuable than coin. These lessons, reinforced year after year, became embedded in the social fabric, shaping generations who viewed community not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible, living network that ensured everyone's well-being. Even simple gestures carried profound significance. A neighbor might deliver a few freshly baked loaves of bread, a small pot of stew, or a handful of preserved berries. Though modest, these gifts were deeply meaningful, representing thoughtfulness, respect, and care. When received, they were often met with gratitude expressed through shared labor, reciprocal offerings, or heartfelt thanks. The exchange was continuous, a quiet dance of giving and receiving that sustained relationships over time. Thanksgiving amplified these practices, offering a moment to recognize and celebrate the network of support that had carried families through the year. The wilderness itself shaped these community bonds. Isolation could be stark, especially during long winters, when snow or rain made travel difficult and homes were separated by miles of forest or fields. In these conditions, neighbors were vital. A single family might not be able to complete a harvest, repair a roof, or manage livestock without assistance. Visits to check on one another, to share supplies, or to provide labor were not optional. They were essential. Thanksgiving, then, became a ritual acknowledgement of these realities, a formalized moment to express thanks for the people whose presence and help made survival possible. It reinforced the understanding that each household, while independent, was inseparably connected to others. Cultural and religious practices often intertwined with these communal gatherings. Many families offered prayers or blessings not only for their own household but for neighbors, friends, and the land itself. Gratitude was extended to God, to nature, and to the human network that sustained life. In some regions, hymns or songs accompanied shared meals, while in others, quiet reflection around the table emphasized mindfulness, awareness, and reverence. Regardless of specific customs, the focus was consistent, acknowledging interdependence and celebrating the cooperative spirit that allowed communities to endure. Neighbors also shared news and stories during these gatherings. Letters, reports of weather, the arrival of distant travelers, or news of trade and market opportunities were exchanged alongside food and hospitality. In this way, communal meals became hubs of information as well as nourishment. Knowledge traveled in tandem with provisions, and families remained connected to the wider social and environmental context, reinforcing bonds that were both practical and emotional. Thanksgiving gatherings were thus multidimensional. Sustenance, celebration, education, and community all interwove in quiet, meaningful ways. Children, once the meals concluded and the evening deepened, often engaged in shared play or tasks with neighboring children. Simple games, songs, and small chores offered opportunities to reinforce social bonds across households. They learned cooperation, empathy, and shared responsibility from an early age. The relationships forged during these gatherings extended beyond the immediate feast, becoming part of the rhythm of daily life, shaping friendships and alliances that would endure long after the meal was finished. Even the act of leaving a neighbor's home carried ritual and significance. Families often walked home together, discussing the meal, the work, and the challenges ahead. Conversations included advice on crops, news of livestock, or stories passed down from elders. The journey reinforced the sense of interconnection and continuity, the understanding that no one truly lived in isolation. Thanksgiving, therefore, was not a single moment of communal celebration. It was the culmination of a season of cooperation, reflection, and mutual support, a point in time where the year's efforts were acknowledged and honored collectively. Generosity also extended to travelers or those without permanent homes. Those passing through, whether merchants, wanderers, or distant relatives, were often invited to join in meals. This practice reflected a wider ethic of hospitality and social responsibility, ensuring that even those outside the immediate community were acknowledged, supported, and welcomed. Sharing food in this way strengthened not only individual households but the social fabric of the region, fostering a culture of trust, compassion, and reciprocity. Ultimately, community bonds and neighborly support formed the backbone of early American life. Thanksgiving acted as a gentle reminder of this truth, highlighting the quiet, consistent acts of generosity that had allowed families and communities to endure. Through sharing meals, offering labor, exchanging knowledge, and extending hospitality, households strengthened ties that were essential for survival. Gratitude extended beyond the home, encompassing the network of relationships that made life in the wilderness sustainable, resilient, and meaningful. Through these shared experiences, early Americans cultivated a deep understanding that survival was a collective enterprise. Individual skill, labor, and resourcefulness were important, but they were amplified when combined with the generosity, care, and cooperation of neighbors. Thanksgiving in this context became less about feasts or tradition and more about recognition, acknowledging the human connections that sustain life, the quiet acts of support that carried families through hardship, and the enduring value of community. Even centuries later, the essence of these gatherings endures in the cultural memory of Thanksgiving. The meals, shared labor, the walk across snowy fields, the exchange of gifts and gratitude. All of these elements reflect a fundamental truth about human life, that we thrive not in isolation but in connection, that survival is intertwined with generosity, empathy, and mutual care. The wilderness may have shaped early Americans physically, demanding resilience and skill, but it also shaped them socially, fostering bonds of compassion and interdependence that became the invisible threads holding communities together. In reflecting on these quiet acts of neighborly support, one realizes that the core of Thanksgiving was never about abundance or spectacle. It was about the subtle, enduring, and life-sustaining connections between people. Sharing food with a neighbor was not merely a gesture. It was a lifeline, a reaffirmation of trust, and a celebration of interwoven lives. These gatherings created networks of care that endured long after the hearth fires had died down, ensuring that the human bonds formed in the wilderness would continue to nurture families and communities for generations. Even in the stillness of the evening, as families returned to their own homes, the lessons of the day remained. Gratitude, reciprocity, and empathy had been exercised and witnessed. Bonds were strengthened, trust reaffirmed, and communities knit closer together. The wilderness, though harsh, had been rendered more navigable through these shared experiences. Thanksgiving acted as a quiet, enduring thread, weaving together the lives of families, neighbors, and generations, creating resilience, warmth, and hope in a world that demanded both. In early America, work defined life. From the break of dawn until the last light of evening, families labored tirelessly, tending fields, raising livestock, repairing homes, and preparing for the coming seasons. Every day was governed by necessity, and the cycle of labor was unrelenting. Yet, amid this constant toil, there were rare moments when families could pause. Thanksgiving, in many households, became such a moment, a day set aside not for the creation of wealth, not for the harvest of food, but for rest, reflection, and the quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been endured. It was a rare and precious pause, a day when tools were laid down, the fields were left untended, and work was consciously set aside in favor of contemplation and gratitude. The morning of such a day often began slowly. Unlike regular days when the sun dictated the rhythm of activity, families rose at a more measured pace, allowing the body and mind a brief respite from months of relentless effort. The hearth was tended, fires were stoked to provide warmth, and simple preparations for breakfast were made, often using food that had been preserved from previous days. There was no rush to the table, no urgency to complete tasks before the next obligation. Instead, the household moved with a quiet deliberation, aware that today was different, aware that this pause was intentional, a sacred interval carved out of an otherwise demanding life. Breakfast itself, though simple, carried a special significance. Freshly baked bread, porridge made from preserved grains, and perhaps a few fruits or nuts gathered from the surrounding land formed a humble meal. Families ate together, sitting around wooden tables or benches that had supported countless meals before. Conversation was slower, gentler, often reflective. Parents might recount the events of the year, noting challenges overcome, successes achieved, and lessons learned. Children listened with attentive curiosity, absorbing not only stories but also the sense of continuity, the understanding that life was a series of cycles, in which effort and endurance were rewarded with moments of peace. After breakfast, many families engaged in quiet reflection. Some chose to walk in the surrounding fields or along forested paths, observing the land they had worked so diligently to cultivate. The sight of snow beginning to blanket the fields, or the way sunlight filtered through bare branches, offered a sense of serenity and perspective. Others remained indoors, near the warmth of the hearth, sitting together in silence or engaging in calm conversation. Reflection was not a formal ritual, but a natural response to the rare gift of time, a chance to consider the hardships that had been overcome and to appreciate the simple blessings of survival: shelter, food, health, and family. During these moments of pause, gratitude became tangible. Families thought of the labor that had sustained them, the planting, watering, harvesting, and preserving that ensured they would not go hungry. The tending of livestock that provided milk, meat, and eggs, the repairs to homes, fences, and barns that protected them from storms and harsh weather. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, was acknowledged, and each difficulty, no matter how challenging, was given space for contemplation. The day provided a rare opportunity to recognize the cumulative effect of months of effort, to understand that survival was not merely a matter of luck, but a product of persistence, skill, and dedication. Even routine chores took on a new character during this day of rest. While most labor was set aside, small, gentle tasks were often performed with mindfulness rather than necessity. Preparing simple meals, sweeping floors, or tending a fire became acts of contemplation. There was no hurry, no pressure to complete the work quickly or efficiently. Instead, every motion was imbued with awareness, turning ordinary actions into forms of meditation. Families might step outside to observe the movement of clouds, the pattern of wind across fields, or the stillness of frost-laden branches. Observing nature fostered awareness of seasonal cycles, reinforcing the understanding that human labor was interwoven with larger forces beyond individual control. Contemplating these patterns offered perspective, patience, and a sense of belonging within the broader world. Reflection on nature was both grounding and inspiring, reinforcing the lessons of resilience and gratitude that defined the day. Conversations during this day were often slower, deeper, and more meaningful than on ordinary days. Families discussed not only practical matters but philosophical questions, ethical dilemmas, or shared memories. Children, encouraged to participate, learned the value of listening, consideration, and thoughtful expression. Even disagreements were approached with calmness, tempered by the prevailing atmosphere of contemplation and awareness. The day fostered not only rest but personal and social growth, as reflection extended beyond the individual to encompass family dynamics, relationships, and community connections. As evening approached, the household might gather once again around the hearth. The fire's glow, warm and steady, provided comfort as shadows lengthened. Reflection often deepened during this time, with each family member considering not only their own experiences but also the collective journey of the household. Gratitude became more focused, awareness more acute, and the sense of peace more profound. This quiet pause, in contrast to the bustle of ordinary life, was both restorative and transformative, leaving participants with renewed energy and perspective. Nightfall solidified the day's purpose. With the work of the day, or of months, set aside, families were able to rest fully, both physically and mentally. The sense of accomplishment mingled with calm reflection, creating an emotional and spiritual richness that ordinary days rarely allowed. Children drifted to sleep with gentle thoughts of family and home. Adults considered the lessons of the year, the challenges overcome, and the blessings that had sustained them. The day of rest and reflection concluded in serenity, leaving a sense of renewal that would carry into the work and efforts of the coming season. Even in its simplicity, this day was profound. Pausing work, reflecting on hardship, expressing gratitude, and observing the natural world and familial bonds created a holistic experience. It was a day designed not only for physical recovery, but for emotional and spiritual reinforcement. In early America, where survival demanded constant labor, such a pause was revolutionary, a deliberate choice to honor effort, endurance, and life itself. The lessons of this day extended beyond the immediate pause. Families learned to value reflection alongside labor, to balance effort with mindfulness, and to integrate periods of gratitude into daily life. Children absorbed these lessons organically, understanding that work was not merely toil but part of a broader cycle that included rest, awareness, and acknowledgement. The day also reinforced intergenerational continuity, as elders shared wisdom and experiences while younger members listened and internalized the rhythms of reflection and gratitude. Even centuries later, the concept of pausing to reflect after intense labor resonates. Early Americans understood that survival was more than sustaining the body. It was nurturing the spirit, observing accomplishments, and appreciating the resilience of oneself, one's family, and one's community. A day of rest and reflection, though simple and unadorned, carried profound depth. It was a celebration of endurance, an acknowledgement of struggle, and a gentle affirmation of life's value. In these moments, families discovered the essence of Thanksgiving not as a formal holiday, but as a lived experience. The pause offered perspective on hardship, gratitude for labor, and a sense of peace that lingered well beyond the day itself. Work might resume, storms might come, and challenges might arise. But the lessons and calm of the day endured, reinforcing resilience, gratitude, and human connection. The simplicity of the day, tools set aside, fires maintained but not overworked, meals shared with care, and time spent in thoughtful observation, created a rhythm that was restorative and enduring. It was an anchor amid the unpredictable demands of life, a deliberate space for renewal and mindfulness. As a principle, families carried the insights, gratitude, and calm of this day into the seasons that followed, allowing reflection to influence work, relationships, and community bonds. Through centuries, the memory of such days has persisted in the cultural imagination of Thanksgiving. It remains a symbol of the quiet power of reflection, of the necessity of pause, and of the enduring value of acknowledging one's own labor and the support of those around them. In early America, these days were rare and precious, yet they exemplified an understanding of balance, gratitude, and human resilience that continues to inspire. They remind us that amidst work, struggle, and uncertainty, taking time to reflect, rest, and simply breathe is not only restorative, it is essential. In early American homes, evenings were defined not by electricity or modern conveniences, but by the gentle, flickering light of candles. These simple flames were more than a source of illumination. They were beacons of warmth, attention, and reflection. In a time when the work of the day had ended, the harvest had been stored, and the household gathered together, candlelight created a space for connection, learning, and tradition. It was in this glow that children learned the stories of their ancestors, absorbing lessons of resilience, gratitude, and the meaning of Thanksgiving long before the concept became formalized as a holiday. The experience of sitting together by candlelight shaped the moral and emotional framework of generations, embedding values that would endure far beyond the immediacy of the flame. The preparation for these moments was often quiet and deliberate. Candles, carefully made from tallow or beeswax, were trimmed just the right length to burn steadily through the evening. The scent of the melting wax mingled with the lingering aroma of meals, creating a unique ambience that was simultaneously comforting and grounding. Families arranged themselves near the source of light, positioning benches, chairs, or cushions in a circle to maximize visibility and intimacy. Every flicker of the flame cast moving shadows on the walls, transforming the familiar shapes of furniture and household tools into a gentle, shifting backdrop for storytelling. The room itself seemed to take on a sacred quality, a place where attention was focused, hearts were open, and lessons could be absorbed with ease. Stories told by candlelight were more than entertainment. They were education, culture, and moral guidance. Parents, grandparents, and elders recounted tales of the family's journey, of ancestors who had braved the wilderness, cultivated the land, and endured hardships without complaint. Each story carried a practical dimension, lessons on planting, harvesting, cooking, hunting, and navigating the seasons, alongside deeper moral and emotional truths about perseverance, generosity, and gratitude. Children listened with wide-eyed attentiveness, absorbing both the content and the cadence of storytelling, learning not just facts but values. These evenings became a gentle form of instruction, where the medium, the soft, oscillating candlelight, enhanced the depth of engagement, creating a memory that lingered long after the flame had died. Content of these stories often revolved around the hardships and triumphs of early life. Families spoke of harsh winters that tested their endurance, of crops that barely survived frost or drought, of livestock lost to disease, and of neighbors who offered crucial support in times of scarcity. Yet alongside these tales of struggle were celebrations of human ingenuity, courage, and resourcefulness. Children learned that survival was not guaranteed by luck alone, but through diligence, planning, and cooperation. Candlelight allowed these lessons to be communicated softly but memorably, creating an atmosphere of reverence and attention. The smallness of the flame, contrasted with the enormity of the lessons, reinforced the significance of humility, reflection, and care. Evenings by candlelight were often punctuated by small rituals that deepened the sense of tradition. Before a story began, families might offer a moment of quiet thanks for the harvest, for shelter, for health, and for each other. Children were encouraged to consider the efforts that had made their lives possible, from the work of parents to the legacy of grandparents and the contributions of neighbors. The act of acknowledging these efforts, even in the absence of grand ceremony, instilled a sense of gratitude that became habitual. Over time, children internalized this practice, learning that giving thanks was not only a response to abundance, but a recognition of endurance, labor, and interconnectedness. Candlelight also created a sense of intimacy that allowed lessons to resonate deeply. The soft, undulating shadows seemed to slow the pace of thought, encouraging reflection and contemplation. In this environment, stories were not simply heard, they were felt. The youngest children absorbed the tone, cadence, and emotion of the narrative, sensing the triumphs and struggles of those who came before. Older children and adults could engage in quiet discussion, asking questions or offering their own interpretations, further reinforcing understanding and internalization. The flickering flame became a mediator between generations, facilitating a continuity of memory and value that extended well beyond a single evening. Children learned through observation as much as through words. Watching an elder handle a candle with care, noticing the attention paid to the flame and the gentle gestures that accompanied storytelling, instilled lessons in mindfulness, respect, and patience. They observed the way parents listened to one another, the way voices were modulated, and the way pauses were used to emphasize meaning. These subtleties were absorbed unconsciously, shaping not only comprehension but also behavior, teaching young minds how to approach life with care, attentiveness, and appreciation. Candlelight, by softening the surroundings and focusing attention, amplified these effects, turning each story into a lived experience. Even practical knowledge was conveyed through candlelit evenings. Recipes for simple, enduring dishes were described in detail. How to prepare cornbread, roast root vegetables, preserve berries, or cook wild game. Techniques for planting, harvesting, and storing crops were discussed in a conversational manner, ensuring that children internalize the wisdom needed for survival. Hunting strategies, methods for making tools or repairing structures, and the proper care of livestock were often interwoven into these narratives. Candlelight provided both the literal and figurative illumination for knowledge, highlighting lessons in a context that emphasized care, patience, and attentiveness. In this way, children were prepared not only for immediate needs, but for the long-term responsibilities of adulthood. Cultural and moral lessons were similarly transmitted. Stories emphasized virtues such as humility, cooperation, compassion, and perseverance. Children learned that wealth and abundance were transient, that generosity to neighbors and family was essential, and that endurance through hardship was more valuable than temporary comfort. The contrast between the flickering candle and the enduring values conveyed created a sense of sacredness and permanence, ensuring that the lessons would resonate deeply and remain with listeners throughout their lives. Candlelight, in this sense, became more than illumination. It was a teacher, a guide, and a connector across time. Even the structure of storytelling reinforced tradition. Elders would begin with simple anecdotes, gradually moving to more complex narratives, often pausing to ask children questions or invite participation. Songs, rhymes, or simple games might be interwoven to maintain engagement and reinforce memory. The cadence of speech, the rhythm of the flame, and the attentiveness of the listeners created a natural environment for learning. Over time, children became storytellers themselves, echoing lessons learned and passing them to younger siblings or cousins, ensuring that traditions were continually renewed and reinforced. The atmosphere created by candlelight also reinforced emotional learning. Shadows and flickering light made the room feel intimate, safe, and contemplative. Children could explore emotions such as empathy, gratitude, patience, and resilience within a secure environment. They witnessed adults displaying calm reflection, expressing gratitude, and acknowledging hardships with humility. The subtle interplay of light and shadow mirrored the balance of challenges and triumphs in life itself, creating a multisensory understanding that reinforced intellectual and emotional lessons simultaneously. Even the smallest gestures held meaning. Passing a candle, adjusting its flame, or attending to the hearth became symbolic acts of care, responsibility, and attention. Children absorbed the importance of stewardship, not only of physical objects, but of knowledge, family, and moral values. Candlelight taught mindfulness, the awareness that small actions could have meaningful consequences, that attentiveness to others mattered, and that care, reflection, and gratitude were habits to be cultivated patiently. These lessons, reinforced nightly, shaped character as much as any formal instruction. Religious and spiritual elements were often intertwined with these moments. Families might offer prayers or blessings, giving thanks for survival, for sustenance, and for community. Stories often included references to faith, providence, and moral guidance, providing a framework for understanding the world and one's place within it. Candlelight reinforced this connection. The physical warmth of the flame mirrored the warmth of gratitude. The steady glow reflected the constancy of moral principles, and the quiet attention required to watch and listen reflected the mindfulness central to spiritual practice. Through these practices, children internalized both practical and ethical wisdom, learning that life required both action and reflection. The learning extended beyond the household. Visitors, neighbors, and extended family members were often included in candlelit storytelling sessions, creating a broader network of shared knowledge and tradition. Songs, stories, and practices were exchanged, memories were reinforced, and relationships were strengthened. Candlelight gatherings were, therefore, both intimate and communal, weaving together the threads of family, friendship, and community into a shared cultural tapestry. Each flame, each story, each lesson contributed to continuity across households, ensuring that the lessons of endurance and gratitude were widely understood and respected. Over time, children began to internalize these traditions. They learned to recount stories themselves, teach younger siblings, and participate in the rituals of reflection and gratitude. The candlelight experience became more than a nightly habit. It became a lens through which the world was understood, shaping perceptions of work, hardship, generosity, and celebration. By the time they reached adulthood, these lessons were embedded in their character, guiding decisions, relationships, and responses to adversity. Candlelight had provided both the literal illumination for reading, storytelling, and reflection, and the figurative illumination of values and understanding. Even the most subtle aspects of candlelight shaped memory. The smell of melting wax, the warmth radiating from the flame, the gentle flicker that danced across the walls, all became associated with learning, comfort, and security. Children remembered not only the words but the sensations, the atmosphere, and the emotional resonance of the evening. Candlelight, modest and humble, became the vessel for these teachings, casting gentle illumination not only on the faces of children, but on the principles that would guide them throughout life. Sitting quietly, listening, observing, and internalizing, children came to understand that giving thanks was not merely a ritualistic act, but a practice of mindfulness, empathy, and recognition of the efforts and resilience that made life possible.